Hello and welcome to this episode of RPGGamer Top 5s, and this time we're going to do the top 5 RPGs on the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance, commonly abbreviated as GBA, is a 32-bit handheld video game console developed, manufactured and marketed by Nintendo as the successor to the Game Boy Color. It was released in 2001 and was part of the 6th generation of video game consoles. The original model did not have an illuminated screen. Nintendo addressed that, however, with the release of a redesigned model with a frontlit screen, the Game Boy Advance SP, in 2003. Another redesign, the Game Boy Micro, was released in 2005. Contrary to the previous Game Boy models, which were all following the portrait form factor of the original Game Boy, the Game Boy Advance was designed in a landscape form factor, putting the buttons to the side of the device instead of below the screen. The system was based around a 16.8 MHz 32-bit ARM 7 TDMI processor with embedded memory, with an 8.4 or 4.2 MHz Sharp LR35902 coprocessor for Game Boy backward compatibility, and had a display of 240 by 160 pixels. When playing Game Boy or Game Boy Color games on the Game Boy Advance, the L and R buttons can be used to toggle between a stretched widescreen format, 240 by 144, and the original screen ratio of the Game Boy, 160 by 144. Game Boy games can be played using the same selectable color palettes as on the Game Boy Color. And with that, let's move on to the countdown. And at number 5, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones by Nintendo in 2004, with 409 votes. Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones is a tactical role-playing game developed by Intelligent Systems, and is the 8th entry in the Fire Emblem series, the second to be released outside Japan, and the third and final title to be developed for the Game Boy Advance after The Binding Blade and its prequel, Fire Emblem. Set in a separate continuity to any other Fire Emblem title, The Sacred Stones takes place on the continent of Magville, which is divided into 5 ancient nations, each with a magical stone said to be linked to the imprisonment of an ancient demon. When the nation of Grado begins invading the other nations and destroying the stones, protagonists Erika and Ephraim of the royal family of Renes set out to gain allies from the other nations and halt Grado's conquest. The gameplay is similar to previous Fire Emblem games, focusing on turn-based tactical movement of units across a grid-based battlefield. Core features of the game include permanent death for characters defeated in battle, and support conversations that grant advantages to certain units in battle. The Sacred Stones began development alongside Fire Emblem Path of Radiance as a side project, sharing much of its visual design and mechanics with Fire Emblem, while incorporating elements from earlier entries such as Fire Emblem Gaiden. First announced in mid-2004, it was heavily promoted in Japan. Reception was positive overall for its story and gameplay, although many critics cited it as being too similar to its predecessor. The Sacred Stones would be the last original handheld Fire Emblem title until Fire Emblem Awakening for the Nintendo 3DS in 2012. At number 4, Mother 3 by Nintendo in 2006, with 475 votes. Mother 3 is a role-playing video game developed by Brownie Brown and HAL Laboratory and published by Nintendo for the Game Boy Advance. It's the final entry in the Mother series, and was released in Japan on April 20th, 2005. The game follows Lucas, a young boy with psychic abilities, and a party of characters as they attempt to prevent a mysterious invading army from corrupting and destroying the world. Like previous entries, Mother 3 focuses on exploring the game world from a top-down perspective and engaging in turn-based combat with enemies. Its development spanned 12 years and 4 consoles, beginning in 1994 for the Super Famicom, and then transitioning to the Nintendo 64 and its 64DD add-on. It was initially cancelled in 2000, but development was restarted in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance. Mother 3 was a critical and commercial success, and received praise for its graphics, music and story. However, some believed its gameplay offered few innovations to the role-playing genre. The game was never released outside Japan, though it has generated a cult following, an English translation which received over 100,000 downloads. At number 3, Final Fantasy VI by Square Enix in 2006, with 894 votes. Set in a fantasy world with a technology level equivalent to that of the Second Industrial Revolution, The game's story follows an expanding cast that includes 14 permanent playable characters. The drama includes and extends past depicting a rebellion against an evil military dictatorship, pursuit of a magical arms race, use of chemical weapons in warfare, depiction of violent apocalyptic confrontations with divinities, several personal redemption arcs, teenage pregnancy, and the continuous renewal of hope and life itself. Like previous Final Fantasy installments, Final Fantasy VI consists of 4 basic modes of gameplay: an overworld map, town and dungeon field maps, a battle screen, and a menu screen. The overworld map is a scaled-down version of the game's fictional world, which the player uses to direct characters to various locations. As with most games in the series, the 3 primary means of travel across the overworld are by foot, chocobo, and airship. With few plot-driven exceptions, enemies are randomly encountered on field maps and on the overworld when travelling by foot. The menu screen is where the player makes such decisions as which characters will be in the travelling party, which equipment they will wield, the magic they learn, and the configuration of the gameplay. It is also used to track experience points and levels. And number 2, Pokemon Emerald by Nintendo in 2005, with 1014 votes. The gameplay in Emerald is largely the same as in Ruby and Sapphire. Much of the game takes place in overhead style. Player characters can move in 4 directions and can talk to other people on the overworld. Players can encounter wild Pokemon by walking into grass, surfing on their Pokemon, walking through caves, and by other means. They can also battle other trainers' Pokemon. When this happens, the game shifts to a battle screen, where players send out the first Pokemon in their party, and they take turns in attacking, where the first strike is determined usually by the speed of the 2 Pokemon. When a Pokemon hits 0 hit points, they faint, forcing the Pokemon's trainer to switch out. Once one trainer runs out of Pokemon, the battle is over. The setting and story remain largely the same as Ruby and Sapphire. Players can choose between either a boy or a girl, both of whom have been given new outfits with a green colour scheme, and one of the 3 Pokemon before they proceed from their hometown into the rest of the game's world. Players are tasked with filling their Pokédex by catching different Pokemon species and evolving them. They're also tasked to complete 8 gym challenges and defeat the Elite Four and its champion by battling their Pokemon. And at number 1, Golden Sun: The Lost Age by Nintendo in 2002, with 1672 votes. Picking up the story during the events of the previous game, The Lost Age puts the player into the roles of the previous game's antagonists, primarily from the perspective of the magic-attuned adepts, Felix and his allies, as they seek to restore the power of alchemy to the world of Weyad. Along the way, the player uses Psi Energy to defeat enemies and discover new locations, help out local populations, and find elemental Jinn, which augment the character's powers. The Lost Age presents a traditional role-playing game formula that its series first pioneered. Players guide a cast of characters as they journey through a fantasy-themed world, interact with other characters, battle monsters, acquire increasingly powerful magic spells and equipment, and take part in a building predefined narrative. While many actions the player takes are compulsory and central to the story, The Lost Age allows the player to complete many objectives in the order of their choice. Much of the time spent outside battle takes place either in the game's overworld or within dungeons, caves, and other locales with puzzles integrated into their layout. Unlike the original game, in which the overworld was explored on foot except for a brief non-navigable boat ride, a large portion of The Lost Age's gameplay involves navigating a magical ship across a large sea, visiting continents and islands. So that's it for this list of the top 5 RPGs on the Game Boy Advance. So what did you think? Because this was a platform that completely passed us by, so we never got to experience any of these games. Did you? Anyway, please let us know your thoughts in the comments below or by getting in touch through email or the website. And, as always, many thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like what we're doing, but most of all, you look after yourselves. And we'll catch you later. Bye!